I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to the RNC, summer is coming. Happy Earth Day, Earthlings. On the show tonight, GOP King of the Hill, and we remember the legacy of Prince. But first, the Republican Party's spring meeting in Hollywood, Florida, which wrapped up today with a big locker room pep talk by Reince Priebus. The RNC chairman urged state leaders to unite behind whichever candidate emerges from the Republican convention victorious. But it was a private presentation given yesterday by Donald Trump's emissary and convention manager, Paul Manafort, to RNC members that was still reverberating through the meeting and through the party more broadly today. The full readout of that presentation was first reported by our Bloomberg colleagues Jennifer Jacobs and John McCormick. In it, Manafort laid out a case for why the Republicans shouldn't be worried about Donald Trump's very, very, very low favorability ratings.
Clinton's negatives are serious because they're character negatives. See, people don't trust her. They don't like her. They think she's a liar. They think she does things only for her interest. The Clinton Corporation, all of the issues that go to character. Trump's negatives are negatives that deal more with his personality. People don't know yet what to make of him. Some of the stump speeches he's given, some of the style he has, some of the ways in which he's presented the issues. But it's his personality that people have trouble with. As a campaign manager and campaign consultant, fixing personality negatives is a lot easier than fixing character negatives. You can't change somebody's character, but you can change the way a person presents himself. He's sitting in a room, and he's talking business, and he's talking in politics in a private room. It's a different persona. And when he's out on the stage, when he's talking about the kinds of things he's talking about on the stump, he's projecting an image that's for that purpose. And you'll start to see come together in the course of the next several months.
So, Mark, Paul Manafort's put forward a pretty provocative premise there, an argument. Is there any reason to think that what he's saying is true?
So the heart of what he said is that it's easier to convince people that you've got a different personality than it is that you've got a different character.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I've been thinking a lot about whether this is just bull spin or there's something to it. I will say there are two related things that go into his argument that are true. One is the private Trump is somebody who I think people would feel more comfortable with as president than the way he often performs in public. This notion that people mock that when he says, I'm going to act presidential, you're going to be so sick of me acting presidential, you'll be bored. That's true. And the second thing that's true is Trump has the capacity to surprise. Trump could start behaving differently, and people would be like, wow, that's different. I don't think Hillary Clinton has that capacity.
I thought about it for a while, too. I think it's almost total bullpucky, straight through and through, for these two reasons. The first of all is that the distinction between character and personality seems to me very thin and tenuous. Character and personality are both about public image, and you can change both of those things. And we've seen candidates in the past change how people perceive them. Hillary Clinton's perceptions in the public are more hardened than the ones toward Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But I don't think it's a difference between character versus personality. The second thing I'll say is that the problem for Trump is the positions on issues that he has taken give him big problems with large segments of the electorate, including Hispanics and women. Those are issues. Those aren't about personality. Those are things he has said he stands for. Those are going to be problematic for him because the Clinton campaign will not let him just shift positions willy-nilly going forward.
Yeah. I agree with you. There's more complex than he laid it out as a black and white thing. But it is the case, as much as people know him, they don't know him as a political actor the way they know her. I think he has got the capacity. I think Manafort's right that he's got the capacity to change impressions more than she does. But I agree with you. This distinction he's making is a little bit fuzzy.
Well, I think he's also just like, I know the bell just went off, but he's also trying to sell Republicans on the notion that basically like that Donald Trump was like kind of a phony, is kind of a fake, and he's going to be a different guy. He might be able to make that sale because that might be true.
All right. Wait, there's more. In that same private meeting that Manafort did last night with Republican National Committee members, he made the case for a new and improved Trump 2.0 that included raising money for down-ballot races. The Republican frontrunner is going to take care of the whole party, if he's a nominee, by tapping his gold-encrusted fundraising Rolodex to help raise huge amounts. So, John, how big a card, how big a bargaining chip did Manafort put on the table here?
Well, let's start with the prior thing. The question of money is a huge question for the Republican Party. Their coffers are depleted. The state of their race has put them in a position where financially they're at a huge disadvantage. A lot of candidates down ballot are totally worried about this topic. So if the Trump campaign can credibly claim to help the problem, it's a huge bargaining chip. I'm not sure that what Manafort said gets them close to being credible on that front.
Why did the Republican Party like Mitt Romney? Why did they turn to George Bush? Why did they turn to people? Because the person...
Benjamins!
Yeah, the person who looked like he could raise the most.
Benjamins!
If Trump can convince people at the convention, if
Right.
Trump today could convince people that he'd be a better fundraiser for down ballot races
Totally
and for
agree.
party committees than Cruz and Kasich, and there are arguments there to be made, it'd be fantastic. And if he does it, if he becomes a nominee, it's a huge open question.
Yes.
Manafort can make the argument, but can Trump raise $1.5 billion? I don't know.
There's nothing that we agree on the premise. It matters a lot, and if he can be that fundraiser, it will help him enormously with elites and establishmentarians and down ballot candidates who might be willing to accept the notion of Trump and all of his baggage if he's got a lot of dough. But nothing Manafort said at that meeting made it seem like a gold-plated guarantee.
Would the richest people who have supported Republican super PACs, assuming Trump raised money for super PACs, would the richest people in the country who normally support Republicans support Trump? The Ricketts family, I don't think is going to do it. Would Paul Singer? Would people who've given a lot? Would Sheldon Adelson? There's lots of questions, but Trump could be the best fundraiser of the three, and that would worry a lot of people if he proved it.
Or he could be the worst fundraiser of the three. All
Yeah.
right. Yesterday, we talked about how Trump, when he was asked about that North Carolina bathroom law that's causing so much controversy, he suggested that transgender people should be allowed to use basically whatever latrine they feel most comfortable with. Facing criticism from Ted Cruz and others in his party, the Republican frontrunner went on Hannity last night and elaborated on his position.
We have to take care of everybody, frankly, and North Carolina, which is a great place, which I won, by the way. I love North Carolina, and they have a law, and it's a law that, unfortunately is causing them some problems, and I fully understand if they want to go through, but they are losing business, and they are having a lot of people come out against. With me, I look at it differently. We have so many big issues to be thinking about, Sean. We have ISIS to worry about. We have bringing trade back. We have rebuilding our military. But I think that local communities and states should make the decision, and I feel very strongly about that. The federal government should not be involved.
Some people viewed that, Mark, as a little bit of a walk back, but that didn't stop Ted Cruz from piling on today. His campaign tweeted out a web video that warns, quote, "Should a man pretending to be a woman be allowed to use the women's restroom? The same restroom used by your daughter?" End quote. If Trump becomes the presumptive nominee, he's also in for a likely showdown with anti-abortion forces in his party because of Trump's position that the GOP's platform language should be softened to include those famous exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. So, Mark, there's no doubt in my mind, I'm sure in yours, that Trump's taking some degree of political risk here within his party on these social issues. Can you understand that risk? Is it worth it potentially?
It's kind of extraordinary. Trump takes so many risks on the eve of the convention, basically, 6 weeks out. Or a little more, a couple months out. He is taking provocative positions, unnecessarily so. These are questions he could have dodged on social issues that most Republican delegates disagree with him on, and where Ted Cruz, who's looking for a wedge to go after Trump, could go in big.
And I'll tell you what.
So he's taking a risk, but he obviously thinks it's a good one, and it obviously, if he can survive this, would help him in a general election.
I mean, I find it all the more perverse because it's at the same moment when he's going all out, or his team is going all out to reassure the party.
Yeah.
It's all about calm down. He's just a traditional Republican nominee. Well, a traditional Republican nominee at this stage is not taking these kind of chances and talking this way about social issues. In fact, normally someone like Mitt Romney or someone like George W. Bush is kind of running away from these issues so that the platform says whatever it says, and then you campaign in the general election without really raising the hackles of the assembled delegates.
One of Trump's calling cards is fearlessness,
Yeah.
and one of his calling cards is electability. And of course, the public polls don't suggest he is electable in a general election.
Right.
This may be a way to convince the delegates. Look, this guy understands the prospect of winning a general election involves winning some centrist voters, and maybe he's taking positions to try to improve himself on the electability front. Also, though, one of his calling cards, saying what he believes. And I think on these issues, he's saying what he believes. All right, taking a break now, but coming up, Virginia just got a whole bunch of new potential voters. We'll explain who they are and why it matters right after this. Virginia's Democratic governor, a top Hillary Clinton ally, Mr. Terry McAuliffe, dropped a dramatic executive order on the Commonwealth of Virginia today. More than 200,000 convicted felons, including violent offenders who've served their time and have completed their probation and their parole, can now register to vote in the Commonwealth. John, what are the political implications of what Terry McAuliffe has done?
Well, look, first of all, I think he's done the right thing. Let me just say that as a matter of substance. I think if you're someone who goes to prison, serves your time, and you get out, done your debt to society, you should be allowed to become back a full-fledged member of society, and you should get the right to vote. That's the first thing to say. The political thing is a huge percentage of the Virginia prison population is African American, and many people will look at this and say this is a nakedly political move to try to move a bunch of new potential likely Democratic voters into the Democratic column and give Hillary Clinton in the general election an advantage in an important swing state.
Terry McAuliffe has picked a fight, not his first fight with the Virginia legislature, is dominated by Republicans. Ed Gillespie, who's likely to run for governor next time, said he thought for nonviolent offenders, maybe this is something that should be discussed. It's the thing with the violent offenders. It's not just restoring voting rights; it's other rights as well that has gotten some people upset.
Yeah.
And it's going to, I think, raise more speculation that Terry McAuliffe could end up Hillary Clinton's running mate.
Right, for the political reasons that I just laid out, which is that it's going to be seen as a political favor to Hillary Clinton.
Well, not to reward him for a favor. I don't think he needs to curry favor.
You know
with
what I mean,
but this notion of energizing the base, this will reverberate not just around the country, not just in Virginia, but around the country. The reality is Virginia had one of the most restrictive laws in the country, a residue of not just the Civil War, but an updating of the laws early last century.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that this is something that should have been looked at. Republicans would say, look at it, but negotiate with the legislature. Don't just do it unilaterally. And it will go back to this debate that we see in Washington about whether executives have the authority to do something like this. This is not the last word. This will be challenged in court.
Can you imagine Terry McAuliffe on the ticket?
Oh, nothing could be better.
I'm asking you something different, though. Can you imagine it?
Not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. All right. Still basking in the glory of Hillary Clinton's New York victory, her staff and supporters and surrogates have all brought out their American-made abacuses, or is that abaci? I'm not sure, to argue that Bernie Sanders has basically no plausible path to the Democratic nomination, and therefore he should tone down his rhetoric in the coming primary contests. In interviews and public events, Sanders has responded by not really doing that. Consider this new interview with MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell, where Sanders doubles down on why it is so important that he remain in this race.
Why would we tell the people of California, for example, the largest state in our country, oh, you don't have a right to cast a vote? So I believe we're going to allow, I know that we're going to allow people to decide what agenda they believe in, who they want to lead that agenda. I think this, at the end of the day, is good for the Democratic Party. But I think a healthy campaign is about a clash of ideas. My ideas in many areas are very different than Secretary Clinton's, and obviously we will continue to contrast that. There are a lot of Democrats out there who are scared to death, as I am, about the possibility of a Trump presidency. And the Democrats, by and large, want to see the strongest candidate possible to take on and defeat Trump or some other Republican. At this point, according to virtually all of the polls, that candidate is me.
Today at an event in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Sanders seemed to give Clinton mostly a pass, except by implication when he criticized the Iraq War. So, Mark, neither the media nor the Democratic Party at large, most of them, seem to be pressing Sanders to get out of this race before June 8th. Do you think there's anything that could happen between now and then that would?
You know, right now we don't know how he's going to do in these remaining contests. I think if she went on a winning streak, you know, you could probably hear more voices saying it. But by the time, you know, leave out the Northeastern contest next week, then you've got the contest next month. If we got halfway through May and she'd won everything, would he then be pressured to get out? At that point, I think the June contests are close enough in sight that no. Yeah. I don't think you're going to hear voices. I think people think he's got a distinctive enough voice. They want to let him go, and he will be allowed to go, despite the few people saying now he should get out.
But look, there will be more people calling for him to shut this down if she sweeps these 5 contests that we have next Tuesday and sweeps them by decisive margins.
Some, yeah.
There will be more than there are now. The number will increase a little bit. Part of the question, again, goes to tone, and we played that bite from Andrea, when Sanders' interview with Andrea, which is actually pretty calm and not that harsh. There were some things he said last night that were a lot tougher than that, where he keyed off of things that Joe Biden had said to the New York Times and so on. You know, if he doesn't attack her judgment, doesn't attack her character, is not kind of slashing, or at least in the way the Clinton people think of it as a slashing attacker, they can live with him staying in the race in the long run. But if he's too harsh and too negative, he'll get more pressure.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a mixed bag. That interview with Andrea, clearly he was more restrained than he had to be.
Yeah.
But it is also the case, the early indications to me are that when people like David Plouffe say things to try to force him out of the race, he gets his back up. He is not going to be pressured out of this
irascible.
race. So the more the Clintons try to force him out, the less likely he is to get out. My guess is that they'll figure that out. They'll tone it down. He'll stay in. He'll attack her some, but they'll hope it won't get much notice if she keeps winning. All right, when we come back, the latest from the Republican National Committee meeting in Hollywood, Florida, ended today after these words from our sponsors.
Welcome back. The RNC meeting in Hollywood, Florida finished up today. Mark, this is a pretty big meeting in a lot of ways. Last time the party kind of ex officio or officio gets together before the convention down in Cleveland. What are your takeaways from what we've heard from our reporters down there all week?
Well, there was attempt to change the rules. It was a little bit of ironic. The people wanted to change the rules, wanted to make a change that would make it less likely that there'd be a white knight. Yeah. But the reality is keeping the rules the way they are makes it more likely that there'll be a white knight. I think that you saw Kasich and Cruz try to make the case that they should be the Trump alternative. I think they both came away. We don't know what happened in every private meeting, but in terms of the coverage, largely empty-handed. There was more of a movement towards Manafort's argument that the party needs to be the Trump party. And so if there's any news there, if history is going to record any news, I think it was the Trump folks did a pretty good job of moving the dialogue towards the notion that Trump should win. And the last thing I'll say is Reince Priebus gave a speech today in which he said two things. One is people should rally around the nominee. There shouldn't be a stop somebody movement. You know, people
Too late for that.
People are paying attention to the notion that he said, well, you shouldn't get the nomination without a majority. Well, duh. Yeah. Of course you got to get a majority.
You can't get the nomination without a majority.
But I think you say it's too late. Yeah, there's some people who were just
there's never a Trump.
Yeah. But if Mitt Romney and John McCain and Jeb Bush boycott the convention, that's survivable. If Priebus really urges people to get in line and the delegates get in line, that's to make a big difference if Trump's the nominee in terms of unifying the party.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, look, I think they made some progress this week, the Trump people did, but it still strikes me that they have not radically altered the tone. There's still a lot of nervousness down there. And people look at the, quote, new Trump and they see the things he's doing. They like the professionalization. They're comfortable with Manafort in a way that they weren't comfortable with Corey Lewandowski or the kind of ragtag outfit that was around Trump before. They like having someone to deal with who looks like them.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think there's still a lot of nervousness about the fact that Trump is a loose cannon and that people are waiting to see not just how many delegates he accumulates over the next 6 weeks, but how does he comport himself over the next 6 weeks, not over the 6 days since the New York primary or the 4 days since the New York primary. What happens here over these next 6 weeks? Is Donald Trump really more disciplined, really more traditional, as Manafort said, over the course of 6 weeks?
Joining us now by telephone from Florida, our Bloomberg colleague Jennifer Jacobs, who's been covering the RNC meeting. Jennifer, if you're Ted Cruz, what's the best news you can say you've brought out of Hollywood, Florida at this RNC meeting? What's the best thing that happened to Team Cruz there?
Well, they say they have brought on new supporters. They say they got a comfortable handful, more than a comfortable handful of RNC members to come their way. So they think they're making progress that way. They did win a lot of points with the whole group of Republican National Committee members down here by doing these one-on-one meetings with them. They had a speech that was tailored right to the party members, and a lot of people were talking about it afterwards and saying that it was a really good message. So they liked that.
So, Jennifer, you were among those who broke the story of the Manafort meeting last night. Just give us as much detail as you can on the promises he's making and this pitch that he's laying down.
Right. He dangled a lot of promises and pledges, lots of goodies. So he said, don't worry about what Donald Trump is saying up on that stage. If he's ranting and raving and it's really irritating you, just disregard it. He doesn't really want to change the rules for the nominating process. He doesn't want to. And that he's just play acting. If you see all of that, audacious stuff that he's doing on stage, well, don't worry. In the coming months, the backstage Donald Trump will suddenly be coming out more and more, the more reasoned, measured Donald Trump. So he reassured on that. They also said Magic Trump. He's going to expand the map. He's going to carry the brand into more than just traditional GOP state, and so they really like to hear that. Manafort was promising to help candidates on the down ballot to win, and then Manafort said, you know all those high negatives Trump's got? Yeah, we know it, but no problem. We know how to fix that. It's just a personality thing, but we can fix that. And they also said that they're going to raise money and link up with establishment groups and Congress and think tanks and just unify in general. So he made a lot of promises. And I was talking to a lot of members afterwards, and everything they said was really sounding good. They're ready to be new BFFs, but they're waiting to see if it actually does happen. There was a lot of skepticism from people saying, yeah, right, we'll believe it when we see it.
Jennifer, we talked about Reince Priebus's speech today, pretty much pro-Trump in its main emphasis of saying, you know, you should come together behind the person who gets the majority. Is Reince Priebus, do you think, now resigned and his advisors resigned to the notion that they're going to have to plan for a Trump coronation at the convention?
No, I don't think so. I think people are still neutral. They're not sure who it's going to be. You know, of course, you had Katie Packer-Gates from the Stop Trump movement coming down here today saying, listen, committee members, now is not the time to rally around someone you find objectionable. You don't have to love Ted Cruz or John Kasich. Just know that we're going to have an open convention, and who knows what's going to happen on that third ballot. So just stay calm. And, you know, and then Reince was just saying, no one's going to walk in with less than 1,237 and walk away with this thing, close only counts and horseshoes and hand grenades. But, you know, the message was, whoever it is, we're all going to unify. And Katie Packer-Gates said, yeah, I'm on board with that because it's not going to be Trump. So right. Sure, I'll be unified with whoever it is as long as it's not Trump.
Jennifer, you had two different projections diametrically, starkly at odds. You've got, as you mentioned, Katie Packer-Gates and Tim Miller, who's going to be on this show very shortly, who put out documents basically saying it is impossible or very, very unlikely for Donald Trump to get to 1,237 delegates by June 8th. On the other hand, the Trump people have put out talking points, at least, that say, oh, no, we're definitely going to get to 1,237. We're going to get to 1,400. So,
right.
so among RNC members, which of those calculations do they find more credible?
They don't believe for sure that Trump knows that he's going to make it. They really don't. They say it's just a gigantic question mark. They have no idea if this is going to be an open convention or not. You don't see many people buying that argument that they're going to make it by June 8th.
Jennifer, last question. What's the difference between Des Moines, Iowa and Hollywood, Florida? Quickly.
Palm trees.
Palm trees. All right. Jennifer Jacobs down at the RNC meeting in Hollywood. Jennifer, thank you.
She likes those palm trees a lot. All right, coming up, we got two political operatives with one goal, stopping Donald J. Trump. We'll be right back with them.
Our guest tonight is two guests tonight. Both are trying to stop Donald J. Trump, billionaire, from becoming the Republican nominee. But we're not sure if that makes them full-time allies or not. Tim Miller is Jeb Bush's former communications director, and he's now an advisor to the anti-Trump group, Our Principles PAC. Kellyanne Conway runs one of the Keep the Promises super PAC supporting Ted Cruz, is an advisor to them all. They're both in Washington. And we're going to start, guys, with a little bit of an icebreaker where I want you to say, starting with Tim and then Kellyanne, agree or disagree with the statements. Here we go. Tim, just say agree or disagree. Tim, agree. Your two organizations are effectively allies.
Allies against Trump, agree.
Kellyanne?
Somewhat agree.
Somewhat agree. I knew you wouldn't play by the rules. Tim, Governor Kasich should drop out of the race. Agree or disagree?
Now that I know that we can cheat, disagree.
Disagree. Okay. Kellyanne, agree or disagree?
Strongly agree.
Strongly agree. Okay. Tim, Lord of the Rings is better than Harry Potter.
I'm not really into the magical forest, regardless, so I guess
pass.
Agree.
Agree. Kellyanne?
Agree.
Lord of the Rings is better than Harry Potter. All right. John?
I'm going to go through here. All right. Tim, only candidates who ran for president this cycle should be considered for the nomination at the convention, assuming there's a contested convention?
You know, I think most likely agree, but you know, if you get to a third or fourth ballot, anything can happen at a convention.
I noticed how Tim was just doing speculation there about what will happen rather than saying whether he agrees or disagrees. Kellyanne, agree or disagree with that premise?
I'm a woman of brevity, apparently. Strongly agree. Paul Ryan is right. You should have gone through you would have had to go through the process. The voters like to poke the fruit this time. We had lots of choices, lots of time. 17 people ran. We'll have people with enough delegates who go into Cleveland who are in a position to acquire more of them and be the nominee.
Okay, agree or disagree, Tim? If Trump is less than or fewer than 100 delegates shy of 1,237, he will then claim the Republican nomination.
Disagree.
Kellyanne?
He needs all 1,237.
We'll be able to claim the nomination, you said, before the convention?
We'll be able to get there. I'm saying we'll be the nominee. If he enters the convention with fewer than 100 short, will he eventually end up being the nominee? He will eventually end up being the nominee.
He could be. He'll be in a good position, but you need 1,237.
All right. Tim, quickly from you. Prince was greater than Michael Jackson.
Oh, agree.
Prince was greater than the
Absolutely.
Beatles.
Yes, agree. He was greater but less influence, so depends on how you look at it.
Kellyanne, Prince greater than the Beatles?
That's a jump. No, that's a jump ball.
All right, okay.
I think they're all talented in their own different ways, and I mean, it's a huge loss.
All right, so Kellyanne, there are 15 contests left. Donald Trump lost Wisconsin badly with both of you are your organizations making pretty big efforts there. What are states coming up in those 15 where you think there could be conditions that are Wisconsin-like, where Trump faces real problems from your efforts?
Certainly Indiana on May 3rd, but even next Tuesday, Senator Cruz is vying for delegates in states that are probably more hospitable to Mr. Trump in the Northeast. But Indiana on May 3rd is a hugely important state. You've got Nebraska, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, and Oregon are proportional. And of course, you go to the big prize of California, where people will say, well, California is a liberal state, it's a moderate state. This is a Republican primary situation, and every time we run moderate Republicans in general elections in California, they lose by double digits. So perhaps the Republicans in California, the conservatives in California, would like a real conservative. I call California the liberation of the long-suffering voters. They're so excited that their vote's going to count. You have 53 congressional districts there. They're awarded proportionally. You have to sort of slice and dice those districts and figure out which ones are most amenable to your particular candidate's message, and that's what we plan to do.
Tim, do you think that you put out a memo that talked about how Trump was never going to get to 1237 before June 8th? Is he going to do really well on Tuesday, and therefore does it mean essentially where you're going to stop him is in the next 2 months, the next set of 10 contests?
Yeah, look, I think we've always felt like Trump was going to do well in New York, which he did, and was generally going to do well on Tuesday. We went up in Maryland with some advertising earlier this week and are doing some targeted advertising in Pennsylvania, where we think Senator Cruz and potentially Governor Kasich could win some districts and take delegates away from him. But I think in the statewide races, Trump is going to do well on Tuesday. Now, the race, though, turns then once you get to Indiana, Nebraska, and all this list of the states that Kellyanne just mentioned. And I think the map is really tough for him after Tuesday, and so absolutely I think he's going to have some trouble as long as we can continue to push back against this false inevitability narrative that they're trying to put forward that really is detached from reality.
Kellyanne, you see a lot of research. What's the single most effective current argument that pro-Cruz forces, the anti-Trump forces, are making against him being the nominee?
It's really this. It's what happened yesterday with NBC's Savannah Guthrie. It's this. The downside of being an outsider is that you really just haven't thought about these policies. And if you're always going to answer, let alone govern by your gut, then we get in the course of 40 seconds Donald Trump saying transgender bathrooms good, pro-life plank that's existed for 36 years, put there by President Reagan, bad, and it should be changed to conform to his 3 exceptions, even though those same exceptions were held by nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, for example. And then that he's going to tax the rich. And we all know that when you hear tax the rich, some bureaucrat in Washington decides who the rich are when they decide who should be taxed. So it's really that it's the downside of being the outsider when you get to this point where you're going to get rapid fire questions about policy and not just the podium to yourself at rallies.
Tim, do you agree that that's the most potent argument, and how would you encapsulate it in an ad?
I think that that's one of the most potent arguments, and I think that Vladimir Putin ally Paul Manafort, one of his top advisors, played into that when he basically said that Trump is playing this persona going forward. What we've seen in the ads that are the most effective, and what you'll see in the coming up states, are that Trump hurt regular people to help himself. And you see that in things like Trump U and in his business practices. Number two, what Kellyanne laid out, that he's a phony, he's not really a conservative. And number three, it's an electability and a women's message that he is not going to appeal to women in a general election against Hillary Clinton. So those are three ads that people in Maryland and Indiana will be seeing from us.
Kellyanne, looking ahead to the biggest delegate prize of all that's remaining, and the biggest delegate prize of all, period, is California. Of the 53 congressional districts in California that are basically holding separate elections, how many of those are congressional districts that Ted Cruz can win?
We have identified at our PAC about half of them that we think we can compete in viably. It always comes down to resources, certainly time and treasure, but we certainly have looked at the state, looked at the 12 different media markets, the different congressional districts, but we're also doing that in Indiana, where you have 9 congressional districts. We looked at it in Maryland, where you have 9 congressional districts. We looked at it. So California just is this huge, you have to think about the 53 separate races you would be running and then winnowing it down to really, we don't want to do scattershot. We don't believe in that. We really believe in focusing. And I just want to echo what Tim just said about the women's message. Donald Trump losing to Hillary Clinton by over 20 points among women is fairly new. He was at better parity with her earlier in these contests, and I think the last month have shown sort of a temperament or a judgment and specific comments punishing women who get illegal abortions, retweeting Heidi Cruz's picture, right. Sadly. It's really cost him, I think, among women. If your whole narrative is you're a winner, and you can't win in the fall, even those Republican primary voters who will look past the potty mouth politics aren't really willing then to take a chance on somebody who can't get it done.
We got very little time left here for you, Tim. Real quick, just if that's right, if Ted Cruz can compete in half of the California congressional districts, how many can Kasich compete in, do you think?
I think an additional handful.
Right. Okay. So
on top of that half, which would get Trump under a majority of delegates potentially in California.
Okay. I have to say, Donald Trump and Paul Manafort are formidable. So are you two, Kellyanne Conway and Tim Miller. Thank you both for coming in. Up next, Al Hunt. Need we say more? And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM.
According to Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own, there is no crying in baseball. And according to our next guest, there is no whining in politics. We are joined now by Bloomberg View's Al Hunt, the great Al Hunt, whose latest column urges some presidential candidates to quit complaining all the time about the rules. Al, thank you for coming on the show. Let me ask you this question, okay? We now have a new Donald Trump, or so we are told by the Donald Trump forces. How plausible is the new Trump?
About as plausible as the new Nixon was 40 years ago. It's an oxymoron that Donald Trump will be presidential, John. It's like saying that if only those NASCAR drivers would drive more carefully and more cautiously. People go to car races to see crashes. People are flocked. The Donald Trump flock does to him because of his insults, his shots, Lion Ted, Crooked Hillary, the venom. If Donald Trump wanted to act presidential, he would have to talk about substantive issues of which he knows almost nothing and seems to care very little. His one foray into foreign policy, every expert I talked to ridiculed.
Al, let me ask you about how well you know Paul Manafort. You've been in Washington for a long time. Give us a thumbnail sketch of that guy.
I've known Paul for over 40 years. I've liked him. He does a good job at conventions. Hasn't done it in a while. And I think probably in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I think his political savvy, his currency at least, is exaggerated. I think Paul is going to have huge problems ahead because some of the clients that he represented, we only hit the tip of the iceberg. They are some really awful, dreadful people. Paul made an awful lot of money, but that when you rise to the level he has today, that's going to become much more public in the weeks ahead.
I agree with you about that, Al. I'm surprised it hasn't become an issue already. Just put on your cultural, anthropological hat here and talk about in the culture of the Republican Party as we head towards Cleveland, there's this real split. People like Chris Christie, Paul Manafort saying, hey, I'm going to work for Donald Trump. I want to get Donald Trump elected. And then you've got people like Mitt Romney and others who are part of the Never Trump movement, and then a lot of people in between. What separates somebody like a Paul Manafort from somebody like a Mitt Romney?
Well, Paul hasn't, Paul has never been a policy person. And as I said, hasn't been in the game for a while. I think Romney is probably truly horrified by Trump. This is ultimately about somebody being president of the United States. And, you can take a Bernie Sanders or a Ted Cruz, two people, and you can say some of their views are crazy or whatever have you, but they at least seriously deal with some issues, and certainly Mitt Romney did. I don't think anyone accuses Donald Trump of that. He says he's going to renegotiate the trade pact with China. The problem, Mark, there isn't a trade pact with China. And that goes across the board.
RNC members are typically not that into policy. They're into winning elections. I was surprised to some extent at the warm reception, as best I could tell from afar, that Manafort and Rick Wiley and the other Trump folks got down there. In other words, the RNC and Reince Priebus, at least rhetorically, seem open. They seem closer to the notion of, hey, if this guy wins the nomination, let's all get on board than the Romney view of Trump.
Well, I think 2 points. I mean, Jennifer Jacobs, I think, earlier said there was a lot of skepticism also down there. Reince Priebus wants this convention to end and with some kind of harmony. If it doesn't, it really wrecks his whole tenure. I think he's been a pretty good chairman. But if this ends up in chaos, it's the lead in Reince's obit 50 years from now. So he wants harmony, and a number of those RNC people want that. They don't want Trump, and they don't want harmony. They may be in total conflict. Or they want harmony.
Right. Al, you got Paul Ryan down there in Washington, D.C., who's decided he's not going to be a white knight. Presumably he would like to move some policy, or at least lay out a policy agenda before the Republican convention. Is that plausible? Is that something you think likely to happen?
Not something that's really serious for a couple reasons. Let's not forget, Paul Ryan has been either chairman of the Ways and Means Committee or speaker for 5.5 years. They have yet to move an alternative to Obamacare. If you're going to put out a serious policy proposal, which I think he genuinely would like to do, frankly, as a counter to Trump, is something that their candidates can run on, you have to have something about what is the alternative to Obamacare. And how is he going to deal with immigration and trade, two issues on which he is 180 degrees apart from Donald Trump. So I think they'll put out something, but I think it's going to be fairly superficial.
Al, you feeling good about the Nationals right now? Just thumbs up or thumbs down?
I'm feeling great. I'm going to go watch Bryce Harper hit his 9th and 10th tonight, John.
All right, good luck with that. Although, as you know, I do hate the Nationals. All right, Al, it's always a pleasure. Up next, remembering Prince and his political and social impact. We'll talk to Touré right after this.
Tragic death of Prince is going to remain a mystery for at least a little bit longer. Investigators trying to piece together the cause of his death today said so far they've come to no obvious conclusions. They said, though, there's no reason to believe his death was a suicide. Autopsy results are expected to be released in the coming weeks. Yesterday, we talked about Prince as both an artist and a political force. Reaction continues to come in from all quarters. Hillary Clinton told a Philadelphia radio station she was stunned and called Prince a, quote, bigger-than-life personality. Donald Trump tweeted that Prince was, quote, an amazing talent and a wonderful guy. John Kasich called him an extraordinary musician. That is true. We want to continue our conversation about Prince today with Touré, the author of the 2013 book, I Would Die For You, Why Prince Became an Icon. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Lots has already been said about an extraordinary guy. Any extent to which the commentary is overstating how important he was, or we're not there yet?
No, I don't think we're quite there yet. I mean, we're putting him in the proper context as one of the greatest musicians of the modern era, a guy who had every talent that a modern musician could want to have, to be able to play, write, dance, produce, have the visual sense, have the hard work ability, everything you could possibly want, the competitive drive. So, I mean, when somebody truly epic passes away and we're trying to put him in a context, it's like, well, we can't, we can't go too high because this is the ceiling, Madonna, it's like him, Madonna, right? Michael Jackson, right? Madonna's not nearly as talented as these two, right? She's on each level, singing, writing. So let's leave her out.
Yeah.
Michael's a great writer. Michael's an amazing dancer. Michael's a great singer. But Prince made more great albums than Michael Jackson. So.
And he also didn't play 17 instruments.
Right. Right.
Which is kind of an important
Well,
thing.
and also had a broader vision of communication. Michael Jackson was an entertainer and a visionary about visuals, but not as broad a vision about communication, right?
Yeah,
and message.
I absolutely. I mean, I'm just writing for the Times about Prince's spirituality and the importance to his music and his canon. But also, you know, I mean, nothing against Michael Jackson, but Michael Jackson is the leader of that group, but there is a support group that is helping him get to this zenith. Right. Prince is alone. And when Michael is in LA with Berry Gordy, Prince is basically a functionally homeless teenager, early teenager in Minneapolis. If you'd said that little short guy is going to become all this, you'd be like, no way.
So let me ask you this question. Yesterday, as we were scrambling to deal with this yesterday, as everybody was, you know, this is a political show. We thought, you know, what's Prince's politics? Is Prince a political artist or not? In what ways? I can find some song lyrics. I know the lyrics pretty well. I know his, you know, the gender stuff, social politics, the gender stuff, the spirituality stuff. But if I said to you, Prince, political artist, what are Prince's politics? What you would say what?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of some of the progressive stuff, is absolutely there in terms of the intersectionality, the embracing of racial difference and racial nuance, the embracing of gender difference and gender nuance. I mean, he was intersectional before that was a term in academia. So all those sorts of things that progressives love, he was cutting edge with that sort of stuff. But Susan Rogers, his engineer on Purple Rain, told me he was a conservative. And Eric Leeds, who played saxophone, told me too, like, his final argument with Prince was like, you know, I finally figured out what you are. You're a Republican. And you think about songs like Ronnie, Talk to Russia. He was a conservative, Susan said, in the mold of, I'm making money, I'm successful, I want this money and this success protected. I don't want civil war or nuclear annihilation or any upheaval. You know,
or internet thieves.
Exactly. Yeah. When you're rich, you want status quo, so I can maintain being rich. It's when you don't have money that you need a revolution.
So the Prince canon is done. There'll be no more. Maybe there's some unreleased stuff that'll come out, but
I would think there will be more music.
Yeah, but in terms of what we know, what was unfulfilled? What did he never do that you think he might have done or wanted to do in any medium?
I just think do it again, right? Because he's like a million-selling artist generally, and then Purple Rain goes up here to 20 million, right? You know, he made one great movie, right? The others were like. I think he would have liked to have done another great movie.
Yeah.
I think he would have liked to have done another big album. But I don't think he always looked at sales as a measure of whether or not the project had succeeded. I think he would have just liked to continue to make more. And that's part of what is sad to me, that he wasn't done. He was still performing. He was still writing. A friend of mine was about to go in the studio and make music with him. Still out there tweeting. He was not done.
Well, it seems to me that one of the things was, one of his great victories was a way in which he was, I would call him a radical a couple times in the last couple of days, commercially. The fight with Warner Brothers, getting back his catalog, getting his masters, having full economic control of his destiny. He finally had that now and was in some ways free to stop playing around with that argument and get back to doing what he really wanted to do, which was just make good music, make great music, and make that music and not have to worry about all this business stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you know, look, it's really, really difficult to make great original music after age 40, right? Yeah. Like John Mayer told me about, like, you know, before 40, you're more likely to be able to write a hit song. After 40, you want to spend your time touring because the likelihood of writing a hit song drops because you're just not in the world in the same way as a younger person. I don't know how much more great new songs he was going to make, but I wanted to see more touring. You know, I wanted to see more videos. I wanted to see him try another movie. I mean, there was more he could have done. The guy was such a big thinker. You know, I would love to have seen what else he had in store.
Yep, Troy, thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you.
Talking about this incredible man, incredible topic. Coming up, Who Won the Week, right after this.
So, Mark, the week's over. Who won it?
Clinton and Trump, big New York victories. Both of them now very solid holds on the nominations that they wish.
I don't want to be too sentimental, but in any week where Prince Rogers Nelson died, I feel like we were all losers. Sad.
Really good at who won the week.
Yeah, I know. I'm not good at it this week. I'm not feeling it. Check out my new Culture Caucus podcast with Will Leach on BloombergPolitics.com. We talk about the HBO film Confirmation and about docudramas more generally. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, Emily Chang speaks to the CEO of SecureWorks. Until Monday, from Mark and me here, sayonara.